The man was completely indifferent to Kristina's critical condition. But he became visibly alarmed when a pulse was detected in Joseph. In reality, these were the last beats of his heart, recorded by the medics. It seemed that the possibility of the attacker's survival greatly worried Brandon. The investigators immediately suspected that Joseph might have witnessed something more serious that the suspicious residents of the house were not telling, and that everything was quite different. Juliana's behavior was also strange. She got confused in her testimony, and her confessions sounded no less odd. Therefore, all the participants in the attack were taken to the police station for interrogation. According to the girl, around 7:30 a.m., she and the Benfield's daughter were about to go to the zoo, for which Kristina had bought tickets in advance. They had not even managed to drive 100 meters away from the house when Juliana remembered that she had forgotten the prepared lunches in the refrigerator. They planned to walk for quite a long time, so the nanny decided to go back for the food. As she told, when she turned around and approached the house, she immediately noticed an unfamiliar car in the driveway. From afar, she could see an unknown man with some large bag entering the house. Juliana had never met him before. However, the girl assumed that it might be some repairman or someone else, but just in case, she called Kristina to clarify this. The oddities began when the mistress of the house did not answer the call. Then Juliana called Brandon, who had already left for work at 7:11 a.m. that day. But that day, he did not go straight to the office. Instead, he stopped by a local fast food restaurant for breakfast. The man confirmed this fact. The detectives were able to check the mobile phone data. The geolocation did indeed indicate that he was at the fast food restaurant. However, the time intervals raised suspicions. Juliana told Brandon about the car and the stranger who had entered the house, as well as the fact that Kristina did not answer her call. The girl was afraid to go inside and became even more worried when the head of the family said that they were not expecting the arrival of any workers. Now he himself became frightened for his wife, so he decided to personally return and check what was happening in their house. At 7:37 a.m., he left the fast food restaurant. Near the family home, he met the frightened nanny Juliana and his daughter. Kristina was not answering calls, just as the nanny had said. Brandon took control of the situation. All three entered the house through the back entrance and found themselves in the basement. From this moment on, the story began to sound implausible. Would a person who suspects that an intruder with a large bag and unknown intentions has broken into their house take a child with them to check? Therefore, at first, the detectives assumed that Brandon might have actually known that this was not an intruder at all and that this was some kind of collusion. Another question that puzzled the police was why the head of the family decided to check the situation himself and did not call the police, because it was dangerous. Moreover, he could have saved a lot of time if he had contacted 911 immediately after the nanny's call, instead of going home. Every minute of delay could have cost his wife her life. The lack of logic confirmed the suspicions. One way or another, once in the basement, Brandon left Juliana and the girl downstairs, and he said that he would go upstairs to find out everything. Juliana said that after a few minutes, she heard a scream and a shotgun blast. She recognized Brandon's voice, after which she left the Benfield's 4-year-old daughter alone in the basement and ran to help her employer. While the girl was going up the stairs, another shot rang out. It was Brandon shooting the stranger in the head. According to the man, he found Joseph in the room. The criminal was holding Kristina hostage and threatening to kill her. Brandon aimed his weapon at him and demanded that he drop the knife, but instead of backing down, the stranger began stabbing the woman with the knife. But for some reason, Brandon did not shoot the attacker. Juliana did not see the stranger inflicting fatal wounds on Kristina. When she went upstairs, everything around was covered in blood. The most illogical part was the continuation of the story. Instead of stopping, the attacker, with his last strength and a serious gunshot wound to the head, continued to torture his victim. Then Brandon turned to Juliana and asked her to run to his office and get a second gun from the safe. He told the girl the code. While this dialogue was going on, the criminal continued to slash Kristina with the knife. Why her husband could not shoot a second time to save his wife remained a mystery. Juliana followed the instructions exactly, she brought the weapon, then aimed and shot Joseph in the chest. The police doubted this confession. It was obvious that the attacker, after the first shot to the head, was hardly a threat. So why would Juliana need to fire another shot? And why her? The girl insisted that she acted in self-defense to protect the child and other household members. Then she clarified that she was following the instructions of the employer, so she did not go into details, could not think at such a moment, and was simply confused. The check confirmed that the first shot was fired from Brandon's weapon. The detectives doubted that the girl had fired at all. There was also indirect confirmation. The thing is that Brandon did not say, "we," when he was talking on the phone with the rescue service. He immediately stated that he himself had shot the attacker. While these strange stories were being recorded at the police station, forensic experts were working at the crime scene. Here they found a bag with BDSM equipment, 2 pistols, and a knife. In the basement, the Benfield's 4-year-old daughter was all this time, who, fortunately, was not injured. The police also talked to the girl, but since she had not seen anything with her own eyes, she could only tell about what she had heard. However, except for the shots, she did not make out anything. The law enforcement officers took these strange stories with great caution, but at the initial stages of the investigation, there were no refutations of their story yet. While the detectives were trying to figure out who this mysterious criminal with a knife was, digital evidence from the house was also being analyzed. They examined the computer and all the gadgets of Kristina, Brandon, and Juliana. As it turned out, the deceased was registered on a special social networking site for BDSM enthusiasts. An interesting story concerned the photo of her profile, where she was depicted in a swimsuit. Initially, this photo was sent by Brandon from the computer of the deceased. For some reason, he forwarded it to Juliana, and the girl sent it to herself by email. All these manipulations with the photo looked suspicious. Anyway, through her profile on the site for BDSM lovers, Kristina was acting under a pseudonym. She met Joseph Frein, who was found in the house next to Kristina. The police discovered correspondence that was encrypted. Kristina and Joseph were discussing the possibility of meeting to bring their secret fantasies to life. They talked about sexual contacts involving a knife and blood. This meant role-playing games, as well as a small bloodletting. Based on these messages, the police initially assumed that both decided to meet by mutual agreement to engage in an unconventional form of intimacy, but something again did not add up. Their meeting was scheduled for February 24, 2023. It seemed that Kristina had bought a ticket for her daughter and nanny to the zoo in advance so that the house would remain at her disposal when her husband went to work, and the woman could carry out her plan. Continuing the data analysis, the police concluded that Kristina had nothing to do with this dubious account at all. The detectives checked the probable passions of the deceased but found no evidence that she was somehow fond of BDSM. She had never visited such sites from her phone before. She did not order anything for herself on this topic, and she did not have similar photos in specific clothes. Not to mention games with a knife and bloodletting. Everyone who was well acquainted with the woman knew that she had a completely monogamous marriage. She was very conservative, religious, and categorically against cheating. According to the investigators, in reality, the account on the site for BDSM lovers was created by Brandon, and he forwarded his wife's photo to Juliana for a reason. The husband of the deceased began communicating with Joseph a few days before the murder. He even persuaded Juliana to contact this man, posing as Kristina. They even called each other. During this call, Joseph and Juliana confirmed a previously discussed plan with role-playing games. Joseph was supposed to arrive at the house when only the alleged partner remained there. He was supposed to use means to restrict freedom, stage an attack and immobilize with handcuffs, then cut clothes during a violent role-playing game. Inflict minor injuries and engage in intimacy. Thus, Joseph became a victim of deception and thought that he was communicating with Kristina, who herself wanted all this. Suspecting nothing, Joseph went to the Benfield's house, believing that he was going to play these games by mutual agreement. That is why he went there with a whole bag of adult toys, as allegedly requested by Kristina, but not herself. Interestingly, Brandon was supposed to go to work on the day of the murder, at 7:30, as usual. But he left much earlier to have breakfast at a fast food restaurant, although this was completely uncharacteristic of him. Previously, the man had always had breakfast at home with his wife. It was believed that the man simply wanted to leave the house earlier so as not to spoil the plan. Assuming that Joseph might arrive earlier than the appointed time. There, in the cafe, the man received a call from the nanny and went home at 7:30. Obviously, he was specifically waiting for this call while in the sight of other visitors and cafe staff to create an alibi for himself. Such facts replenished the treasury of indirect evidence throughout the investigation. But what could be the motive for such an unusual and intricate plan? Of course, it was about the romance that started between Brandon and Juliana back in August 2022. For several months, they thought out this fatal conspiracy because they wanted to get rid of Kristina. It seemed strange why the man wanted to portray his wife as a BDSM fan and a completely unknown man as a crazy sadist. Probably, it was a way to confuse the investigation, which almost worked, but not quite as the criminal had planned. The initial plan was that Kristina would be portrayed as an unfaithful wife who was so reckless that she died because of her unhealthy fantasies. Joseph was supposed to turn out to be a sadist who went so far in his inadequate games that he killed another person and then allegedly took his own life. But everything did not go according to plan, so they had to improvise. It is hard to imagine what Kristina felt when Joseph unexpectedly entered the house and began to act out a role-playing game, which, as he thought, had been agreed upon in advance. Further checks confirmed that Joseph did not hide his sexual preferences from loved ones and friends but never imposed anything on anyone. He entered into such relationships only by mutual agreement. In February, when the murder occurred, over the following months of 2023, the detectives carefully analyzed and collected information to recreate a complete picture of what had happened. By this point, physical and digital evidence had been found that Joseph had been lured into the Benfield's house by deception. However, even at this stage, it was not possible to fully uncover all the nuances of the insidious plan. On October 13, 2023, only one arrest was made. The 23-year-old Juliana ended up in prison. She was charged with second-degree murder of Joseph Frein with the aggravating circumstance of using a firearm. Based on the confession and the evidence collected, it was concluded that it was her shot to the chest that led to the man's death. The girl was denied the right to bail. Interestingly, when officers arrived at the Benfield's home to arrest Juliana, they discovered even more suspicious facts. The criminals did not try to hide their romantic relationship. The girl's clothes had already been moved to the closet where Kristina's things had previously been. Her underwear was lying on the marital bed. On the bedside table was a photograph of Brandon and Juliana instead of the old photo with the deceased wife. Even despite these obvious facts, Juliana tried to deny the relationship. The girl claimed that there was nothing between them and that she simply continued to be a nanny for the man's daughter under the au pair program. This lie made no sense, as law enforcement already had correspondence between them, among which were numerous messages of a romantic nature. In fact, they appeared long before Kristina's death. After the October arrest, the public was outraged that only Juliana was in prison. The reason was the continuation of the investigation. It was still not entirely clear who had killed Kristina. Physical evidence was needed to understand who had inflicted the fatal knife wound and other injuries on the deceased woman. Tests and examinations were still being carried out. A relief for those who cared was the removal of suspicion from Joseph, who was officially recognized as a victim of insidious intrigues. Brandon was still at large. By the end of 2023, his mother had moved in with him for support, as well as to help raise his young daughter. During her imprisonment while awaiting hearings, Juliana often called her lover. Naturally, all these calls were tapped. Once, the girl voiced a rather ambiguous expression, which became another indirect confirmation of suspicions. She was worried that Brandon was staying with her only because he was afraid that she would tell the truth. In response, he angrily shouted at her to keep her mouth shut. However, even without her, new information continued to appear. In April 2024, at the preliminary hearings, the prosecutor stated that 2 months before the murder, Brandon and Juliana had gone to a shooting range together. Interestingly, on January 28, a few days after that, the man again went to this place and purchased the same Glock pistol that the nanny had fired. The numbers were checked and matched. The prosecutor even demonstrated the receipt. In addition, a few days before the double murder, both bought new mobile phones, which had a lot of compromising queries in the browser, as well as calls and suspicious correspondence. They used these phones for conversations to coordinate their actions. Before leaving for work on that fatal day, Brandon turned off the sound on his wife's phone and hid her phone in the kitchen so that Kristina could not use it. And also so that he and Juliana could continue to act out their plan, calling the woman as if worried about her. When Brandon was called to testify, he refrained from answering most of the questions. However, the prosecutor's office had enough evidence to charge Juliana. At the preliminary hearings, Joseph's mother spoke. The woman stated that her son had always been kind and sensitive, despite his peculiar passions in his intimate life. He never forced anyone or raped anyone. In his life, there really had never been a criminal record or problems with the law. The mother did not want Joseph to be portrayed as a monster after his death and called for justice. The public demanded that Brandon also be arrested, but months passed, it seemed that no one was showing any interest in the man. Despite public pressure, no one wanted to rush. In this confusing case, it was required to show patience and collect evidence. In any case, the main suspect was under constant surveillance. Law enforcement did not waste time. Several versions were being worked out. One of them suggested that Brandon had stabbed his wife and then staged everything as if Joseph had done it. Finally, in August 2022, the results of the forensic medical examination arrived, which confirmed the guesses. Thanks to the assessment of the number and position of blood splatters, it was convinced that the body had been moved after death. In particular, Joseph's hands were deliberately smeared with Kristina's blood. From that moment, it was believed that the police had sufficient grounds to arrest 39-year-old Brandon Benfield. It was carried out on September 16, 2024. The criminal was charged with the first-degree murder of his wife with aggravating circumstances. In particular, due to the use of firearms. The man was taken to the same correctional facility where Juliana had already been for almost a year. Brandon's trial is scheduled for October 2025. The prosecutor separately noted the large-scale investigative work carried out by the county police department. In his opinion, the revealed truth should play a decisive role in achieving justice. The amount of evidence collected was such that not all of it was even made public. It was even possible to find witnesses who heard Brandon complaining about his wife and claiming that life would be much easier without her. It was found out that Juliana was not the first one with whom Brandon cheated on his wife. These two thought they would get away with it. Brandon was learning Portuguese. Back in October 2023, he and Juliana were discussing the possibility of moving to Brazil. They were preparing to escape. The girl already had a second passport, as the main one was confiscated on the day of the murder. Fortunately, the prompt actions of law enforcement agencies did not allow them to hide. Both were arrested and denied the right to bail. As for Juliana's trial, it was scheduled for April 2024. But on October 29, she agreed to a plea deal. Under the agreement, she was not supposed to testify against Brandon when the man appeared in court. Juliana's charges were reduced to involuntary manslaughter, and the aggravating circumstances were also dropped. She could face up to 10 years in prison. All this time, the prosecutor's office continued to work with Juliana. As part of the plea agreement, the girl presented her version of events. According to her, Brandon entered into a relationship with her and persuaded her to participate in the crime because he wanted to get rid of his wife. To do this, behind his wife's back, he created a fake account for her on a dating site associated with the BDSM community. This happened a few days before the murder. Together they deceived Joseph. He played his part of the performance well, tied up the woman, cut her clothes with a knife, and then Brandon, who shot an innocent person, entered the game. He didn't even have time to understand what had happened. While the man was bleeding, Brandon stabbed his wife. And realizing that Joseph was still alive, he ordered Juliana to take a second gun. Her shot to the chest was fatal. In her defense, the girl stated that from the very beginning to the end, she did not believe that Brandon was capable of doing all this. Juliana hoped that he would stop. However, this did not diminish the degree of her guilt. She had a huge number of opportunities to go to the police and report the planned crime to prevent the murder. Joseph's loved ones did not approve of the plea deal. They insisted that Juliana had shot an innocent person who became a bargaining chip in their bloody plan. Neither Juliana nor Brandon knew Joseph personally to have a motive to get rid of him. He simply became the first random person they pointed their finger at on the site. From that moment on, he was doomed. Joseph's relatives were outraged that Juliana, who had taken the life of their loved one, would get off with a ridiculous sentence. However, the prosecutor's office believes that the decisive factor in all this is the possibility of putting the real mastermind of the bloody affair in prison for a long time, meaning Brandon. In December of last year, the man was charged with additional crimes related to child abuse and neglect of their needs. Unfortunately, as with other points, specific information is not disclosed, as the trial is ongoing. As for the Benfield's daughter, the public from the very beginning advocated that the girl should not be left unattended. By the grace of her father, she was left without both parents. At the moment, the child is under the supervision of Kristina's relatives. Her parents are in the process of obtaining custody. They hope that the hearings in the murder case will not be postponed and, as planned, at the end of 2025, they will be able to achieve justice for the lives taken away. Please write your thoughts and reactions in the comments below. For those who are new here, subscribing is the best way to stay updated on future content. Also give a like please. Take care of yourself and your loved ones. Thank you for your support during this difficult time. Until next time, friends.